Hello, happy Friday. It's race season, or just about race season. Hopefully, some of you already raced. A lot of people are getting ready to race this weekend, and I am continuing on with the theme of racing because that's why we do this. I've spent a lot of time this week talking to my athletes about their race plans, their prep, and all the things that go into having a good race plan and that kind of stuff. If you're feeling bad during your taper, it's okay. It doesn't mean you're going to have a bad race. Please stick to the plan. Make sure you don't go out and panic train at this point. One of the best analogies that I can think of to communicate to my athletes exactly what is going on during a taper situation is think about having a wound. And when that wound is open and it obviously hurts, but you can function with it, right? So you kind of get used to the pain, you get used to dealing with that type of situation. As soon as you start to let that kind of heal and kind of let that scab over, then all of a sudden when you move it, it actually hurts worse, even though it's healing. So you have to allow for that healing process to happen. And so that might go through some points in time where you actually feel a little less comfortable, or it might hurt more, but it's because it's healing. So allow for that to happen. Just because you feel bad on the few days coming in, I promise it doesn't mean that you're going to have a bad race. The other thing that you can expect a lot of times is to feel little pains and little twinges that you didn't experience throughout the training, and that kind of goes back to having that open wound too, because a lot of us live in somewhat of a chronic state of fatigue or maybe a constant state of breakdown. And so when that happens, then you get used to that, and then again you start to feel those little twinges and little aches and pains and that type of stuff when all of a sudden you start to let your body heal. So again, don't panic. That doesn't mean anything. I promise it's not going to hurt on race day if it's something that's weird or unusual going on that you haven't been experienced before. Let that body heal. If you're a numbers person, then your fitness, your CTL, your chronic training load should be dropping about 7 to 10% this week. And that's always a good sign for me and the athletes that I coach. I kind of dial it in with them so that I know. That's one of the nice things, having worked with the athletes I've worked with for so long. I know exactly how much I need to taper them to get them to feel the same way going into the races each time. So we can totally eliminate that guesswork of how am I going to go on race day, because we know we can kind of figure it out through how they're tapering. All right, I have a couple things here that I want to cover. I'm going to finish it with California 70.3. I've been fortunate enough to win the overall amateur there a couple times in my age group, so I have some tips on that course. However, the first thing that I want to say is let's talk about one of the things that drives me nuts. I want you to not tell anybody any excuse going in from now to the race why you won't do well. Because guess what? We're all scared to race. We're all scared to see where we're at. We all have no clue what to expect because it's the first time of the year that we're going to be out racing for a lot of us. I can tell you, I've been racing for 20 years. I've been to Kona 9 times. I've done all that other stuff, and I'm scared to race. I had surgery for that, and I'm finally back to training, and I'm going to see. I'm nervous too, but what the hell? Instead of telling people when they ask you how's training going or how are you going to do not start with it's not going well or all that other stuff, because one, like we've talked about before, your subconscious mind can't take a joke, and you'll start to I tell people to act as if. You don't see any pros walking around Hawaii thinking, oh, I don't know if I'm going to get through this, or this person's going to beat me, or this. Act as if. A lot of times if you set that course for your mind, your physical body will follow. So the worst case is if you really are feeling nervous about this and someone asks, just say, you know what, I'm going to go give it the best I can. I'm excited to see where I'm at. And wherever I am, however this shakes up, we can fix it through training. That's one of the things that we do through training. That's part of the fun of training, right? So this is an opportunity to go showcase and take inventory of where you're at on your training, and fixing it if you want to go faster, that's easy. So the best thing that you can do is be confident and make sure that you control the race. If I can ask one thing of any athlete I work with, I always ask them, please control it, because if you don't control it, then we're back to guessing what went wrong, right? Because every time somebody pops or blows up, it's always a conversation like, well, I think this, or all this other stuff. So if you can control a race, you can always go faster from that point. So the best thing that you can do is control it. And then the other thing is be confident. Every time you're confident at something, I guarantee you do better at something than when you're not confident at it, right? So carry a certain level of confidence into this race because you deserve it, So what goes into a race plan? How do we know? How do we set this up? I kind of talked about it a little bit, but I thought a couple things. One, I'll lead with this. Do not overcomplicate something that should be very easy. Swim, bike, run. So triathletes specifically are notorious for overcomplicating it. Training and the coach-athlete relationship, that's time for some complexity and kind of figuring it out. But now you want to get all that out of the way because complexity is the enemy of success. So one of the things that you want to do is make sure that you come up with a race plan, you kind of memorize it, but you also make it so that it's easy to follow. If it's overcomplicated, you're going to mess it up. So things that I kind of think about for my race plans, for a half Ironman, I always eat the same thing the day before the race. I always eat the same thing the morning of the race. The only thing I'd change for an Ironman is about 2 days out from the race, I'll start changing what I eat and almost shift to a little bit more unhealthy eating, if I'm totally honest, because anything that's super fibrous is going to be rough on your digestive system. It's going to take water to digest, and it could potentially give you an upset stomach on your race day. So I start eating simpler foods as I get closer to the race, and that duration that I start that prior to the race depends on the distance. So half Ironman about the day before, an Ironman 2 or 3 days out. You want to think about what you're going to eat. You want to kind of make sure you have it prepped. You want to make sure wherever you're staying supports that. So if you're planning on cooking and you're staying at a hotel that doesn't support that, that's a problem. So hopefully you've got that all figured out, but you want to figure out where you're staying, what's available to you, what you're going to eat. Figure out who's driving, where are you going to park, what's the parking situation, figure out the day before if you have to pay for parking, if you can prepay it, if you can find, sometimes there's a lot of neighbors and such that will let you park in their yards and that type of thing. You just have to pay, and for me it's worth it because it eliminates a lot of stress, but you can figure that out. You want to have your bag list. One of the best ways that I can figure out, or I have figured out how to lay out what goes into my transition bag, is when I do my pre-race brick before the race, I take the things off that I'm using and I put them directly into the bag. So then there's no question. Anything that I just used for my pre-race brick goes into the bag. I used it, I needed it, it's in the bag, I'm ready to go. If it's not in the bag, I didn't use it and I didn't need it. So it's simple, right? Then I always and before I start the pre-race brick too, I always lay them out as if I was in a transition area so that I run through my transition. So my last pre-race break, I go up to the thing, I pick up my shoes, I put them on. However I'm going to do a transition, that's the best way that I can ensure you that you're not going to forget anything, is you literally practice transitioning through the races, and then when you're done, put it back in your bag. You want to understand transition like we've talked about before. You want to know what the water temperature is. I will tell you, I have seen this happen. Always bring your wetsuit. I don't care if they say the water is going to be 90 degrees and it might be boiling. You're not going to be upset if you accidentally have your wetsuit. I have seen races swear that there's not going to be a wetsuit no matter what. It went out in an email. No matter what, it will not be a wetsuit swim. And it was, in fact, a wetsuit swim. And half the field, including me, had to swim without a wetsuit. So bring your wetsuit. Worst case scenario is you leave it in the car. So you want to know the water temperature. You're going to want to know the air temperature. Have a range of pacing and those types of things for the bike, the swim, and the run. And I say have a range not only in your expected output, but also you want to have a range in the types of things and devices and monitoring tools that you use. So when I'm doing my races, I have several things that I'm constantly checking off. Kind of what are my watts? What's my speed? Because at the end of the day, that's what they measure. How fast did you go, right? What's my breathing like? How do my legs feel? How does this feel relative to the amount of time that I have left? What's my cadence? All these things, but you want to have a couple of different things because not one thing is going to tell you a great picture, So if you're going to race with heart rate and you've never done it before, don't be freaked out if your heart rate's actually a little high. It is not uncommon for your heart rate to be 5 to 10 beats higher on race day, and you might want to adjust your zones accordingly. So hopefully it's really hard. If you're new, it's really hard to simulate the anxiety that you will experience in a race, but that anxiety can be good anxiety. It doesn't mean that because your heart rate's high that it means anything bad. It just could mean that your heart rate's high because you're getting ready to race or you are racing. Make sure you know what you're going to be eating during the race. Make sure you know how you're going to carry that stuff. And then make sure if you drop a bottle and it falls off a cliff into a lava field or something like that, you know what you're going to do in order to make up that caloric deficit. Again, I've been racing for years. I got burned with that at Madison 70.3 last year. Within the first mile, I think every one of my bottles ejected from my bike, and I ran behind. There's no other way to say it. So you want to make sure that you have a plan in place, understand where the aid stations are coming on the bike. If there are aid stations on the bike, I had an athlete race last week that when they started to race, they realized there are no aid stations on the bike. So that would have been a problem. So that means if that's the case, no matter what, you got to stop and get your nutrition or somehow, way, shape, or form if you drop it. Have a lot of things for what if. So what if it's hot? What if it's cold? What if it's windy? Here's a question that I got this week. What if a group goes past me? Should I try to outrace them? Should I drop back? How do I intermix? I don't want to draft, all this other stuff. Look, I can't stand people that aren't in this for the pure intention of seeing how well they can go. I don't really understand why people do this to cheat. I don't get it. But I can tell you that you stressing out about that and you getting consumed with that and letting that ruin your race is the exact opposite thing that you want to do. So it goes back to having your race plan. And this was kind of my answer. There's not a perfect answer, but I would say when that group passes you and you drop back, make sure if they're actually traveling faster than you had planned on going, let them go. You know, don't feel like you have to go past them just because you're angry that they're in a group, right? So, and then if you end up dropping back a little bit, it's really not a big deal. Remember last week we talked about your reaction to things is honestly a lot of times more important than the actual things that are going on. You need to be invested in your race plan. So sometimes my athletes will ask me for what's their race plan, and I always put it back on them. You have to take part in that. You have to think about what it is you think you can do and what your goals are, because I know as an athlete myself, they're going to mean more to you if you participated in setting them out, right? So some of the things that I'll do is I'll look back at some of my past races, or I'll look back at some of my past workouts, and I'll start to identify what it is that I was able to hold wattage-wise or pace-wise or that type of stuff, and I'll start to set those up as my goals for my next race. So if you want to increase your placing, or if you want to increase your speed, then you can start to figure out in training, hopefully with a coach or with a good thought process in mind, what you need to do to take that next step, and then practice those things in training. And then when you take it to the race, you should have that stuff. So you should know what your pace plan is, and you need to think about that as well. Triathlon is not a math equation. A lot of it has to do, like we talked about last week, with your engagement and with you being excited to race. It means so much more if you can harness that stuff. There's research that actually shows that when people are able to compete for something bigger than themselves, they do better. Well, why is that, right? Because our emotional state and our mental engagement is so important. And one of the hard things with triathlon is it's hard to find things, if we're honest, to always compete for that is bigger than yourself. But try, thank volunteers. Think about your family that has supported you. Think about, what it is that means to, whatever that is that helps you motivate, try to make it bigger than you when you're out there, okay? And so that is one of the things that I know it works really, really well. And remember, when it starts to hurt, you chose to do this. Nobody's forcing you to. So part of the reason, and I have to remind myself this too, sometimes when it hurts, that's supposed to be the fun part, right? Because we're pushing ourselves. We want to feel wasted. It's what makes that cold beer at the end feel good, or that pizza or that cake or whatever your indulgence is. If we went out there and it was super easy the whole time, that'd be really boring, right? So embrace that, harness it, and realize that you can do this, and when it does get tough, I've talked to Matt Russell about this too. It's like so important to remember, just keep going, because if you can just keep going, then it's a lot of times it will get better. So before I talk about Oceanside real quick, because I know some of you might not care anything about that, I want to say thank you so much to everybody who's sharing this and viewing it. I really appreciate it. If you feel like this has helped you, great. I appreciate the share or the shout out. Please, I'm always looking for help on knowing what you are looking for. So again, superflycoaching.com/ask a question, and I'll be sure to hit it up on my next live. Okay, Oceanside. Oceanside is an awesome race. It's one of my favorites. The weather there has been rainy before, but usually pretty much without any wide range of what you're going to get there. I guess they've changed the swim this year. So it's going to be an open coast start, and then you're going to swim through so I'm not up to speed on the exact new swim course, to be totally honest with you, but the swim, get through the swim, right? So like that's usually not the biggest impact on the whole race. The bike course sets up to be one of the things that I would always do when I was doing Oceanside is see where the wind was coming from, because depending on which way the wind was coming from, that course can feel harder or easier at the end, especially through the end there, right? So what you want to do though is remember that the hills come about an hour into the race. So that course will be slow on the second half of the bike course, no matter how you're feeling and no matter how that race is setting up with the wind. So for me, some of the hills that are obviously hard were never really the issue for me. Obviously they were hard, obviously, right? And I would get up them, but what was always hard for me with Oceanside was after you get through that speed zone where you have to kind of go down and monitor your speed, because I can't believe I've been racing this long. I remember who died there, but once you get through there, you go through some rollers. And for me, that's where I always got stuck on that course. And I had to always mentally refocus there because it felt like I'd done the hard hills. This shouldn't feel this hard. Now it's kind of hitting at me at a point where it's kind of screwing up my rhythm a little bit. And this kind of sucks right now. And those are all the things that would start going through my head. And that's where you have to refocus. Now, what I found is if you really are going through a tough part there, because it's not impossible, because you did just do some hard hills, I find it's always better just to stay relaxed and let it pass. Practice standing a few times, practice changing into a different gear that you weren't using before. Maybe hitting the muscles a different way would help. But if I found that if I would try to push through it and try to muscle my way through that and try to get back on pace, it always made it worse for longer. So when you do feel that storm, you don't want to totally disengage, but you just kind of want to say, all right, I'm feeling like not great right now, so I'm just going to hold out here for a couple minutes, do my thing, maybe change a different gear, stand up, stretch my back, use that as an opportunity to keep rolling, and then also do the math in your head, even though I said triathlon wasn't a math equation, but in terms of, okay, if I really chill for like a mile here, I'm talking about maybe 2 seconds on this bike course. So don't panic. A lot of times something will get you feeling good again. When you come through the base, you make that right-hand turn. If you're coming into a headwind, that course can feel kind of tough right there. I think it's a little bit of a false flat. You got to stay aero, and that's where I tell myself all the time, this is where all this aerodynamic shit that I buy and do, and thank God I ride Treks and Bontraggers and all that other stuff, because this is where it's all coming to my advantage right now against people that don't have as good a position or don't have the stuff that, you know, I've spent my money on or whatever. So keep telling yourself that when the race is hard, especially when it's windy, that's where you have an opportunity to really set yourself aside from the competition. So there's an old adage out there, you know, you want to race hard when the race is hard, or, you know, put that work in then. So that's one of those times too. Another tip, depending on how fit you are and how fast you're trying to go, don't back off too early. So I think that a lot of age groupers will really kind of back off and prepare for the run miles out. Honestly, I'll wait till like the last mile, half mile, because I'm fit, right? I've tried it, or, you know, that's what I would try to do. And so you can carry a lot of speed in a transition. Except for that course, there is about a half a mile, depending on where the transition is, where it's kind of sketchy going down, but there you're within a half time. If you're not, or half mile, if you're really far out and you're starting to back off waiting for the run, it can be too long. You can cost you some time. Running on the concrete there, that course is not an easy course. Sometimes you have to run through the sand, and then sometimes you go around the building the other way. I'm not exactly sure which they're doing this year. Again, it doesn't really matter because it's pretty short, but the majority of the course is up and down the boardwalk there, even though it's mainly concrete. And then you make a left, you go up a pretty steep hill that's really short, and then you get into some pretty good rollers. And, you know, it's nothing crazy, but it's definitely not flat. So if you're going there thinking this is going to be flat, it's going to be super easy, it's not, you know. So I always look for maintaining my cadence, maintaining my effort. Oceanside is a really congested run, especially on the beach part. So one of the things that I would do is I would physically take myself out of the line of the people kind of struggling, because I didn't want to get mentally in that zone. I wanted to be in my own zone, competing on my own terms. And so a lot of times when it's really crowded, it's harder, but I would try to take myself out of that lulling, marching, death march line of people. So make sure you're maintaining a good pace. keep your cues going. Remember your cadences. Remember all those things that you were setting up to do. Remember, you can see the pier coming back. It's going to be, a little ways out, but you can see it coming back. You have it's a great course for setting up little markers along the way. You have the beach, you have your first set of rollers, you have the turnaround, and then coming back through. It's one of the best courses. It's usually not hot, but it's sunny and it can feel really hot. And there's a big difference in feeling hot and being hot. So just because it feels hot doesn't mean that you are super hot. So those are my tips. I hope everybody has an amazing race weekend. If you're racing 70.3 Texas or Oceanside or coming to Haines City to play with us, I hope everybody has a great race. I hope everybody stays safe. Thank a volunteer, and I'll see everybody out there.